It was a cold evening in the city. The rain had started early, turning the streets shiny and quiet. Most people had already gone home, but one man sat in the back seat of a black car, staring out the window as the wipers moved back and forth. His suit was perfectly pressed, his watch gleamed under the dim streetlights, and his face carried the look of someone who had everything, yet nothing at all. He was one of the city's richest businessmen, known for building an empire from nothing. But behind all the fame, power, and wealth, there was a deep silence in his life. He had no family waiting for him at home. His house was big but empty. His dinners were expensive but tasteless. He lived surrounded by people, yet felt completely alone. That night, after a long meeting that drained every bit of his energy, he told his driver to stop at a quiet place. He didn't want fancy food or more noise. He wanted something simple, something human. The driver pulled up in front of a small restaurant on the corner of an old street. The neon sign outside flickered, half of the letters not even working. It was the kind of place the CEO had never visited before. But for some reason it felt right. He stepped inside. The warm smell of baked bread and coffee filled the air. The place was small with only a few tables and a couple of people chatting softly. The walls were covered with old photos, and the air carried a feeling of comfort. He sat at a corner table, took off his coat, and quietly looked around. A young waitress came over with a gentle smile. Her apron was a little worn out and her hair tied back loosely. "Good evening, sir," she said kindly. "Would you like something warm to drink?" He nodded, not saying much. "Just coffee," he replied. She smiled again, not noticing who he was or how powerful he might be. To her, he was just another tired man looking for a break, and somehow that made him feel strangely at peace. As he waited for his drink, he pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages from his staff. Meetings, numbers, reports, it was endless. He sighed and put it away. He had all the success the world could offer, but no one to share it with. A few minutes later, the waitress brought him his coffee. It wasn't perfect, not like the kind served in five-star hotels, but it had warmth. He took a slow sip, feeling the bitterness and sweetness mix in a way that reminded him of something he couldn't quite name. Then, out of nowhere, a small voice came from beside his table. "Excuse me, mister?" said a little girl standing there in a pink jacket that looked one size too big. She held a small stuffed bear in one hand and her eyes were wide and bright. "Can you be my daddy for one night?" The CEO froze. For a moment he thought he'd misheard her. The words hung in the air, heavy and innocent at the same time. The entire restaurant seemed to go quiet. He looked at the little girl, unsure what to say. "What did you say?" he asked softly, almost afraid to speak too loudly. She repeated, "Can you be my daddy for one night?" "Just for tonight," the man blinked. His heart gave a strange, slow thump. He had been asked for many things in life, money, jobs, deals, but never something like this. Before he could respond, the waitress rushed over. "Sweetheart," she whispered, kneeling beside the child. "You can't say that to people, okay?" The little girl pouted. "But he looks nice," she said. "And I just want Mommy to smile again." The waitress looked embarrassed. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said quickly, standing up. "She didn't mean anything wrong. Please forgive her. It's all right," the CEO interrupted gently. His voice was calm, but inside he felt something stir that he hadn't felt in years. He looked down at the girl. "Why do you want me to be your daddy for one night?" he asked carefully. The girl hesitated, hugging her bear tighter. "Because Mommy is sad," she said. "She works all the time. She never laughs anymore. When I ask her why, she says daddies make mommies smile. So I thought, if you sit with her, maybe she'll smile again." The CEO didn't know how to respond. His throat felt tight. The waitress tried to distract the girl, leading her away, but the man's eyes followed them. Something about the mother's face, it struck him deeply. There was a strange familiarity in her features, like a faint memory from another life. When the little girl returned to the corner booth where her mother worked behind the counter, he kept watching quietly. She was comforting her daughter now, trying to make her laugh. Her smile was warm but tired, the kind that hides pain behind gentle kindness. The CEO finished his coffee, but he didn't leave. Something inside told him to stay. After a few minutes, he stood and walked over to the counter. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Your daughter's very sweet." The woman smiled awkwardly. "She talks too much," she said, trying to brush it off. "She's honest," he replied. "Children usually are." For a brief moment their eyes met and he felt something shift. He had seen thousands of faces in his life, clients, partners, reporters, but this one made his heart skip. There was something about her voice, the way she looked at him, that felt painfully familiar. "Have we met before?" he asked, hesitating. She froze for a second, then shook her head with a polite smile. "I don't think so, sir. I would have remembered." But her tone told a different story. He nodded slowly, not wanting to push. "Your daughter reminds me of someone I used to know," he said quietly. "Thank you," she replied, turning away slightly. "She's all I have." The words hit him harder than she realized. He knew that feeling, having everything and yet nothing. He looked around the diner again. It was old but full of heart. People came here not for luxury but for warmth. And she was the center of it, moving between tables, smiling through her exhaustion, helping everyone before herself. He stayed longer than he'd planned. When he finally stood to leave, the little girl ran up again. "Wait," she said, holding out a small piece of paper. "You forgot your smile." He looked down and saw a tiny hand-drawn picture, 3 stick figures holding hands, one of them wearing a suit. The girl had written under it in shaky letters, "Me, Mommy, and you." His breath caught for a second. He wanted to say something, but no words came out. He took the drawing gently and smiled for the first time that day. "Thank you," he said softly. "I'll keep it." The girl grinned. "Then you'll come back?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe I will." When he stepped back into the cold night, he felt something different. The noise of the city didn't bother him anymore. The world looked softer somehow. Inside his coat pocket, the little girl's drawing was safe and warm, like a spark in the middle of his long, empty life. Back in the car, his driver glanced at him through the mirror. "Long night, sir?" The CEO looked out the window, his mind replaying the girl's innocent face and her mother's quiet smile. "You could say that," he murmured. As the car drove away, rain started falling again, tapping gently against the glass. For years he had lived his life chasing success, but tonight, a stranger's child had reminded him of something more important, what it felt like to be human. He didn't know her story yet. He didn't know why she seemed familiar, but he knew one thing for sure. He'd go back to that little restaurant. Not because of the food or the coffee, but because for the first time in a long while, something inside him wanted to care again, and somewhere inside that quiet diner, a little girl looked out the window and whispered to her mother, "I think he'll come back, Mommy." Her mother smiled faintly, brushing her daughter's hair. "Maybe he will, sweetheart." Neither of them knew that this simple meeting, a tired man, a brave little girl and a mother with a gentle heart, was about to change all of their lives forever. The next morning, the CEO couldn't focus on his usual routine. He had back-to-back meetings, stacks of papers to sign, and people waiting for his approval. Yet all he could think about was that little girl's innocent face and the drawing she gave him. It sat on his desk now, neatly placed inside a clear frame. His assistant had asked where it came from, but he didn't answer. It wasn't something he wanted to explain. That small picture, made with crayons and a child's heart, had somehow found a quiet place inside his chest that power and money had never reached. All day, he caught himself glancing at the clock. By evening, he couldn't ignore the thought anymore. He told his driver to cancel dinner with the board members. Instead, he asked him to head back to the same small restaurant on the corner of that old street. When he arrived, the neon sign was still flickering, and the smell of coffee and bread filled the air again. The same cozy warmth wrapped around him the moment he stepped in. He noticed the little girl sitting at the counter, swinging her legs, coloring something on a napkin. Her mother was serving a table nearby, her hair slightly undone and her apron smudged with flour. The girl saw him first. Her eyes lit up. "You came back," she shouted happily, almost making everyone turn their heads. Her mother looked up too, clearly surprised. For a second, she didn't move. Then she smiled politely and went back to wiping a table, pretending not to notice him too much. The CEO walked over to the counter. "I said I might," he replied gently, looking at the little girl. "What are you drawing today?" She pushed the napkin toward him. "It's a picture of you and Mommy," she said proudly. "You're helping her make pancakes. But you look funny." "I don't know how to draw suits," he chuckled softly, a sound that even surprised him. "I think it's perfect," he said. The mother finally came over, a mix of embarrassment and amusement on her face. "I'm sorry again," she said, shaking her head. "She talks a lot. It's all right," he said kindly. "I don't mind." The woman looked at him for a moment, then sighed. "You really came back," she said quietly, almost as if she didn't believe it. "I did," he replied. "Your coffee was better than I expected." She smiled faintly. "You could have gone anywhere in the city. Why here?" He hesitated, then said truthfully, "It felt peaceful." Something about that answer made her expression soften. She nodded, then walked behind the counter. "Well, peace isn't on the menu, but I can get you another coffee," she joked lightly. He smiled. "I'll take that." As she turned away, he noticed how she moved, careful yet graceful, tired yet strong. There was something in her that spoke of quiet endurance. He found himself admiring that more than he'd expected. Over the next hour, they talked a little. He learned her daughter was 6. She had been working at the diner for almost 3 years. The owner was kind, but business was slow. She worked double shifts to pay rent and school fees. He wanted to ask about her husband, but held back. There was a sadness in her tone whenever she mentioned, "It's just the 2 of us." So he stayed quiet, letting her share what she felt comfortable with. The little girl kept interrupting with innocent questions about his car, his watch, whether he liked pancakes or waffles better. He answered each one with patience, something his colleagues would have found shocking. When it was time to leave, he stood and handed the girl a small paper bag. "For you," he said. Inside was a set of colored pencils. Her eyes went wide. "Really, for me?" He nodded. "Every artist needs good tools." She hugged the bag tightly. "Thank you, mister," she said. "Now I can draw you better next time." Her mother looked at him with quiet gratitude. "You didn't have to," she said softly. "I wanted to," he replied. "It's nothing big, but it was big, and not in price, but in meaning." He hadn't given anyone a thoughtful gift in years. It felt strange, but right. That night when he went home, he didn't feel the usual emptiness. He sat in his large living room, sipping tea instead of whiskey. The silence didn't feel as heavy. He kept thinking about how the little girl had said, "You came back." Somehow that simple joy had stayed with him. Days passed. He returned to the diner again, then again. At first he told himself it was for the food. Then he admitted it wasn't. He came to see them. The woman with the gentle smile and her bright little daughter. Every time he visited, the 3 of them grew a bit closer. He learned the woman loved reading but rarely had time for it now. He learned her daughter wanted to be a teacher, and he shared small pieces of himself too. How his parents had passed away when he was young, how he'd built his company from nothing, how success had left him feeling strangely hollow. The woman listened quietly, sometimes nodding, sometimes offering a few words. She never treated him like a rich man. She treated him like a person. That was what he'd been missing all these years. One evening, as the rain poured outside, the diner was almost empty. He stayed late, helping her clean up. She tried to stop him at first, but he insisted. "It's just wiping tables," he said with a small smile. "I can handle that," she laughed softly. "You don't look like someone who does that often." "Maybe not," he admitted, "but it feels good to do something real." They worked side by side quietly until everything was spotless. The little girl had fallen asleep in one of the booths, clutching her bear. The mother tucked a blanket around her, her face softening with love. "She must be your world," he said gently. "She is," she replied. "Everything I do is for her," he nodded. "You're doing well. She's happy. That says a lot." She smiled faintly but didn't answer. Her eyes were tired, but behind that weariness there was strength, the kind that only comes from love and sacrifice. When he was about to leave, he finally asked, "Do you really not remember me?" She paused, surprised. "We've met before?" He nodded slowly. "Years ago. You worked at my company, in the marketing department. You left suddenly." Her expression changed. The color in her face drained slightly. "That was a long time ago," she said after a pause. "I remember," he said softly. "You always brought coffee to meetings for everyone, even though no one asked you to. You used to hum when you worked. It used to annoy me, but now I think it made the office less cold." She looked away. "I didn't think you'd remember." "I do," he said quietly. "You were one of the kind ones." There was silence for a moment. The only sound was the rain tapping against the windows. Finally, she said, "I left because I had to. My husband got sick back then. I couldn't keep up with both things. And after he passed, I never went back." He felt a heaviness in his chest. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. She nodded. "It's okay. Life moves on." He looked at her for a long moment. "You've done well. You've raised a wonderful daughter." She smiled softly. "Thank you. But please don't feel sorry for me. I don't want pity. I just want to live with respect." That simple sentence hit him deeply. Respect. That's what she'd held on to all this time, even through loss and struggle. "I understand," he said quietly. "You have my respect." That night when he left, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant to meet her again. There were too many coincidences, too many emotions that didn't make sense yet. The next day at work, he called his assistant and asked about community programs for single parents. He wanted to start something, scholarships, support, something real. His team was confused. It was so unlike him, but he didn't explain. He just said, "It's time to do something that matters." Later that evening, he drove by the diner again, but this time he didn't go in. He just watched from his car. The lights were dim, and through the window he saw the woman laughing with her daughter, spinning her around in the small empty space. For a moment he saw something pure, a piece of happiness built without money, without fame. He smiled quietly to himself. For the first time in years he felt hope. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't done with them yet. Something deep inside him told him this was only the beginning of a story neither of them had expected. The days that followed felt different for him. Work didn't seem as heavy anymore. Meetings that once felt endless now passed quickly because, in the back of his mind, he always looked forward to one thing: the evening, when he could stop by that small diner on the corner of the quiet street. It had become more than a restaurant for him. It was a place that reminded him what life could feel like: simple, warm, and real. The woman and her daughter had unknowingly brought color into a world that had turned gray for him long ago. Every time he walked in, the little girl's face lit up as if she'd been waiting just for him. She would run to the door, her tiny shoes tapping against the wooden floor, shouting, "You came again!" And every time he'd smile and say, "Of course. I promised, didn't I?" The mother would look up from behind the counter, half smiling, half shaking her head, pretending not to notice how happy her daughter got every time he appeared. She'd serve him his usual, black coffee and something freshly baked, and they'd talk. Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. He learned that the little girl's name meant hope, and it suited her. She was full of laughter and questions. She'd sit beside him, coloring pictures of stars and houses, while her mother worked quietly, occasionally glancing their way with soft eyes. One evening, as he was leaving, the woman called out, "Wait," and handed him a small paper bag. "What's this?" he asked, surprised. "Dinner," she said. "You can't live on coffee and meetings. Consider it a thank you for the pencils." He smiled faintly. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she replied. "It's nothing fancy, just soup and bread." He took the bag gently. "That sounds perfect." When he got home that night, he placed the bag on his table. His kitchen was spotless, too spotless, like a hotel room no one lived in. He opened the container and the smell of warm soup filled the air. It wasn't restaurant style. It wasn't elegant. But when he took the first spoonful, something in him softened. It tasted like care. He sat there alone at the long table, but for the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt. He even caught himself smiling at the thought of the little girl's drawings taped on his fridge. The next morning, he looked at his reflection in the mirror while adjusting his tie. For years, he had built an image, strong, confident, untouchable. But now, behind that reflection, he saw something else, a man learning how to feel again. Weeks passed. His visits to the diner became part of his life. The staff had grown used to seeing him there. Some customers whispered, curious why a wealthy businessman kept returning to a small place like that. But he didn't care. For once, he wasn't thinking about his reputation. One afternoon, he arrived earlier than usual. The little girl was at school and the woman was wiping tables. She looked surprised but happy to see him. "You're early today," she said. "I had a meeting nearby." He lied softly. "Thought I'd stop by." She smiled, sensing he might be bending the truth but letting it go. They sat for a while, talking quietly. He asked how business was going. She admitted it was tough. Bills were high and her car had broken down again. He offered to help, but she refused politely. "I appreciate it," she said gently, "but I don't want charity. I'll manage." He admired her strength. "You always do, don't you?" She smiled faintly. "We try." That evening, as he left, he called one of his contacts, a mechanic he trusted, and quietly arranged for her car to be repaired. When she found out 2 days later, she confronted him at the diner. "You didn't have to do that," she said, half upset, half grateful. "I know," he said calmly. "But you didn't have to give me soup either. I guess we're even." She tried to hide her smile, but couldn't. "You don't make things easy, do you?" He chuckled softly. "Not usually, but I'm learning." After that day, things began to feel lighter between them. They talked more openly. She told him about her late husband, how he had been kind, how he'd fallen sick suddenly, and how she had to start over with nothing. She spoke of nights when she didn't know if she'd be able to pay rent or buy food, and how she'd promised her daughter that they would still laugh no matter what. He listened quietly, never interrupting. When she finished, he said softly, "You're stronger than anyone I've ever met." She looked down, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I just do what I have to," she said. He nodded. "That's what strength is." From then on, he started helping the diner quietly, paying for new chairs, fixing the leaking roof, replacing the broken lights. The owner was thrilled, thinking it was just a random act of kindness. But the woman knew, and though she didn't say it, her eyes softened whenever she looked at him. The little girl, on the other hand, had no hesitation showing how much she liked him. She'd draw him pictures almost every day, one of them holding hands with her and her mom, one of them eating ice cream, one of them watching fireworks. Each drawing ended up on his office wall, confusing everyone who came in for meetings. "Is that your family?" one of his clients once asked. He smiled quietly. "Something like that." He didn't explain more because the truth felt too personal, too real. One Saturday, he surprised them both by visiting the park where the little girl played. She ran toward him, laughing. "You came," she shouted. "I promised, didn't I?" he said, handing her a balloon. The woman was sitting on a bench nearby, watching with a small smile. When he sat beside her, she said, "You don't have to keep coming, you know. You've done enough." He looked at her, then at the child playing in the grass. "It doesn't feel like an obligation," he said quietly. "It feels like something I should have been doing all along." She turned to look at him, her eyes soft. "You don't have to fix everything," she said gently. "Sometimes being there is enough." He nodded slowly. "I'm starting to believe that." For a long moment they sat in silence, watching the girl chase butterflies under the afternoon sun. It was peaceful, the kind of peace he hadn't known since he was a boy, but deep down he also felt fear that this was too good to last. He wasn't used to happiness that didn't come with conditions. That night, as he drove home, he kept thinking about what she'd said. "Sometimes being there is enough." Those words echoed in his mind. He realized that all his life he had been trying to control things, people, outcomes, success. But here, with her and her daughter, he didn't need to control anything. He just needed to care. One rainy evening, he walked into the diner later than usual. The place was closing, but she waved him in anyway. "You're late," she teased. "Long day," he said, loosening his tie. "But I couldn't miss dinner." She laughed softly. "You're starting to sound like family." He paused at that word. Family. It hit deeper than she might have meant. As she poured him coffee, she said quietly, "You know, my daughter talks about you a lot. She says when she grows up, she wants to be kind like you." He blinked, taken aback. "Kind?" She nodded. "She says you're kind because you listen. Not many people do that." He smiled faintly. "She's a good judge of character." They both laughed quietly, and for a moment it felt like the world outside didn't exist. When he got up to leave, she walked him to the door. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For being around. It means more than you know." He looked at her, wanting to say something, maybe that she had changed his life in ways she couldn't imagine. But he stayed silent. He just nodded and smiled. As he stepped out into the rain, he realized something. He didn't feel like the lonely CEO anymore. Somewhere along the way, he'd become something else. Someone who laughed again, who cared again, who wanted to go home, not to an empty house. but to the warmth of two people who had brought light into his life without even trying. Inside the diner, the woman watched him leave, her heart heavy yet hopeful. Her daughter tugged at her sleeve and whispered, "Mommy, he's our friend, right?" She smiled softly. "Yes, sweetheart. He's our friend," the little girl grinned. "Maybe one day he'll be more than that." The woman laughed quietly and brushed her daughter's hair. "We'll see, my love. We'll see." Outside, the man walked slowly to his car, the rain falling softly around him. He didn't care about getting wet. He looked up at the gray sky and whispered to himself, "Maybe one day." He didn't know where this road would lead, but one thing was certain: he wasn't alone on it anymore. The following weeks felt like a quiet change neither of them had planned, but both had started to feel deeply. The CEO had gone from being a stranger in a suit to someone who belonged. At least, that's what the little girl believed. Every time he entered the diner, she would rush toward him laughing, shouting his name like he was a part of her world now. The woman, too, had grown used to his presence. It was as if his visits had become part of their small family routine. But one evening, something unexpected happened. That night, the woman wasn't at the diner. The little girl sat at a corner booth with the cook, coloring quietly. When the CEO walked in, she looked up, her eyes a little sad. "Mommy's not feeling well," she said softly. "She had to rest today." He frowned with concern. "Is she okay?" "She said she's just tired," the girl replied. "She told me to be brave," he nodded gently. "You're always brave," he said with a smile. He sat with her for a while, helping her color, though his mind was elsewhere. After a few minutes, he stood. "Can you tell me where you live?" he asked carefully. "I just want to make sure your mom's all right." The little girl thought for a moment, then nodded, trusting him completely. "Okay," she said. "But don't tell her I told you." "She doesn't like asking for help." "I won't," he promised. She gave him the address, and after dropping her safely home with a friend who worked at the diner, he went to check on her mother. When he reached the small apartment building, he found it modest but neat. He knocked lightly. There was a pause, then a weak voice from inside said, "Who is it?" "It's me," he said softly. "I was at the diner. Your daughter said you weren't feeling well." There was silence, then the door opened slowly. She stood there in a faded sweater, her hair loose, her face pale but still beautiful in that quiet way. "You shouldn't have come," she said softly, embarrassed. "I'm fine. Just a little flu." He shook his head gently. "You don't look fine," he said. "May I come in?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. Only for a minute. The apartment was small, one bedroom, a living area, and a tiny kitchen. But it was tidy and full of warmth. On the fridge were the little girl's drawings. On the wall hung a small photo of the three of them from the park day. He noticed it right away but didn't say anything. "Sit," she said quietly, gesturing toward the couch. He sat down while she poured some tea for him. Her hands trembled slightly. "You didn't need to come," she said again. "I wanted to," he replied. "You take care of everyone else all the time. Let someone take care of you for once." She gave a small, tired smile. "I'm not used to that, I figured," he said softly. They sat in silence for a moment. The ticking of a wall clock filled the room. He looked at her and saw how much she'd been carrying, the exhaustion, the quiet strength, the kind of tiredness that doesn't just come from work, but from years of holding everything together alone. He spoke gently. "You've been doing this on your own for a long time." She nodded slowly. "Since my husband passed," she said quietly. "He was sick for a while. After he died, I promised myself I wouldn't depend on anyone again. Depending on people hurts too much when they leave." He understood more than she realized. He'd lost people too, not through death, but through distance and time. "Not everyone leaves," he said softly. She met his eyes, then looked away. "Maybe, but I can't afford to believe that again." He didn't try to convince her. Instead, he helped her make tea, cleaned a few dishes while she rested, and before leaving, he left some medicine and groceries on the counter. She protested, but he simply said, "It's just tea and soup. You'd do the same for me." The next day, she returned to the diner looking a little better. When she saw him walk in, she gave him that quiet, knowing smile. "You didn't listen, did you?" she said teasingly. "I'm not great at following orders," he replied. The little girl giggled, sitting between them. "Mommy, he made you soup." The woman blushed slightly. "Yes, I know. Things continued like that, simple, kind, unspoken. But feelings started growing quietly and deeply. The CEO began inviting them to small events, a fun fair, a weekend picnic, a visit to the zoo. He'd never been the kind of man to enjoy such things before, but now he found joy in their laughter, in holding the little girl's hand as she dragged him from one ride to another. The woman watched him closely, often surprised at how gentle he could be. She'd seen him once in the newspaper, the same man who was described as ruthless, uncompromising, and cold-hearted. But the person she saw with her daughter was none of that. He was patient, kind, and even playful. One afternoon, after a long day at the park, they sat on a bench watching the sunset. The little girl had fallen asleep, her head resting on her mother's lap. "She really loves you," the woman said quietly. "She makes it easy to be loved," he replied. She smiled faintly. "She hasn't been this happy in years." He turned to her. "And what about you?" She hesitated. "I'm happier than I've been in a long time." He smiled gently. "Good." There was a pause, the kind that holds 1,000 unsaid words. Then she spoke softly. "You should know. I didn't put that picture up because of what it means to her. I put it up because it means something to me too." He looked at her, his heart beating faster. "I'm glad," he said, "because it means something to me as well." Before either could say more, the little girl stirred, yawning. "Are we going home?" she mumbled. Her mother smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. Time to go." The CEO helped them to the car and drove them home. When they arrived, the little girl turned to him sleepily and said, "Can you be my daddy forever?" He froze for a moment. The same words from that first night echoed in his mind. Her mother's eyes widened. "Sweetheart," but he interrupted gently, smiling. "If your mom doesn't mind, I'll try my best." The woman's eyes softened, tears forming quietly, though she quickly blinked them away. After that night, everything changed, not suddenly, but naturally. They weren't just friends anymore, they were something deeper. The three of them became a small, quiet family in their own way, but not everyone saw it that way. One day during a company event, he publicly announced a large donation to a charity for single mothers and children. Cameras flashed, reporters surrounded him, and his speech was heartfelt. He said, "There are people who remind us what truly matters: kindness, courage, and love. This donation is for them." The next morning, his picture was everywhere, and so were the rumors. Headlines speculated about who had changed him, about the mysterious woman who might have softened the city's toughest businessman. When the woman saw the news, she felt a mixture of pride and fear. That evening, when he came to see her, she said quietly, "People are talking." "Let them," he said calmly. "I don't care." "But I do," she replied softly. "I've worked hard to build a quiet life. I can't handle attention like that." He took her hand gently. "I didn't mean to cause that. I just wanted to help people. People like you." She looked at him, her eyes uncertain. "You don't owe us anything." "I know," he said quietly. "But maybe I want to." She sighed, conflicted. "I just don't want your world to crash into mine. It's too different." He shook his head. "Maybe they're not so different. Maybe they just needed to meet." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she whispered, "I'm scared." He smiled softly. "So am I. But sometimes good things are worth being scared for." Outside, the night was calm. The little girl peeked from behind the curtain, watching them quietly. She didn't understand everything, but she knew one thing. Her mother smiled more when he was around. And for her, that was enough. Later that night, as he drove home, he couldn't stop thinking about her words. "I'm scared." He was too. But beneath that fear, there was something stronger. Hope. The kind of hope that only comes when life gives you a second chance to love again. The following weeks passed with a strange stillness between them. The CEO had started coming to the diner less often. Not because he didn't want to, but because he could sense her pulling away. She was polite, warm, but careful again, as if she was slowly building a wall that had once begun to fall. He understood her silence. The media attention, the rumors, the questions, all of it had unsettled her. She was a woman who valued peace and privacy, and he had accidentally brought the opposite into her world. One morning he sat by his office window looking at the city skyline. The world saw him as the man who had everything, yet at that moment, he felt like he had nothing. The thought of losing them, the laughter, the small dinners, the quiet evenings, left a hollow ache in his chest. He reached for his phone more than once that day, wanting to call her, but stopped each time. Sometimes love meant giving space, even when your heart ached to close the distance. Days turned into a week, and then one afternoon, as he was preparing for a charity event, there was a knock at his office door. When he looked up, she was standing there, holding a small paper bag, dressed simply with the same calm grace he had always admired. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," she said softly. He stood immediately. "You're never a disturbance." She smiled faintly. "I just wanted to thank you for everything you've done, for helping the diner, for caring for my daughter." He nodded slowly, not sure what to say. "You don't need to thank me. I didn't do it out of duty." "I know," she said quietly. "That's why I came, because you didn't have to do any of it, and yet you did." For a moment, the room fell silent. Then she placed the small paper bag on his desk. "She wanted you to have this." He looked inside. It was a drawing. The three of them holding hands, smiling, with a small heart drawn above their heads. At the bottom, in a child's handwriting, were the words, "My family." His throat tightened. He took a slow breath before speaking. "She's a special kid." "She is," the woman said, her voice trembling slightly. "And she's grown very attached to you." He met her eyes. "And what about you?" She looked down for a moment, then met his gaze again. "I tried not to. I told myself this was just friendship, but I can't lie anymore. You've become a part of our lives, more than I ever expected." He took a step closer, his voice soft. "Then why are you pulling away?" She exhaled slowly. "Because I'm scared. Because love has never stayed for me. Because I don't know if I can survive losing someone again." He nodded. "I can't promise I'll never make mistakes," he said gently. "But I can promise I'll never walk away because life gets hard." For a long moment she looked at him, really looked, as if searching for any sign of doubt. But there was none. Then she whispered, "What if people talk again? What if your world rejects me?" He smiled faintly. "Then they'll have to get used to me choosing you." Tears welled up in her eyes, but this time she didn't turn away. Later that evening, he invited her and her daughter to the upcoming company charity event. "It's nothing fancy," he said. "Just a small dinner. But I want you both there." She hesitated, but her daughter's excitement convinced her. "Can we go, Mommy? Please?" And so the night of the event arrived. The hall glowed with soft lights, filled with music and laughter. Guests in elegant suits and dresses mingled around, yet the CEO's eyes kept searching the entrance until he saw them walk in. The little girl wore a pale blue dress with tiny sparkles, and her mother looked stunning in a simple gown that didn't need jewelry to make her shine. The entire room seemed to quiet for a second when she entered, not because of her clothes, but because of her quiet confidence. When they reached him, the little girl smiled up at him proudly. "You look nice," she said. He laughed. "Not as nice as you two." Throughout the evening, they talked, laughed, and even danced a little. It was the first time the woman had allowed herself to relax in his world. But as the event reached its peak, the host took the stage and invited the CEO to say a few words. The room fell silent as he walked up, the spotlight following him. He began his speech slowly, speaking not as a businessman, but as a man who had rediscovered his heart. "Tonight," he said, "we celebrate success and generosity. But more than that, we celebrate people. People who remind us what really matters. For me, this isn't about money or power. It's about connection, about kindness, about finding hope in unexpected places. He paused, his eyes finding hers in the crowd. Sometimes life brings you people who make you feel human again. People who remind you that love doesn't always come from where you expect, but when it does, it changes everything. The bow. Audience clapped warmly, though few understood the deeper meaning behind his words. After the speech, he returned to their table. The woman's eyes glistened with emotion. She didn't speak, but the look she gave him said everything she couldn't say aloud. Later that night, when the event ended, they walked out together. The little girl held both their hands as they made their way to the car. The cool night breeze carried laughter, and for once there was no fear, only peace. In the parking lot, the little girl tugged his hand. "Can I tell you a secret?" she whispered. He knelt down. "Of course." She smiled shyly. "I told Mommy that I want you to be my daddy forever. And she didn't say no this time." He looked up at the woman, who blushed slightly but didn't deny it. He smiled gently at the girl. "Then I guess I'll have to make sure I earn that title every day." The little girl wrapped her small arms around his neck, and he held her close, feeling something pure and irreplaceable. As they drove home, the car was quiet, but it wasn't an awkward silence. It was the kind that comes when hearts speak louder than words. When they reached their building, the little girl had fallen asleep in the back seat. The CEO carefully lifted her in his arms and carried her inside. The woman opened the door quietly, watching him as he gently laid the child on the couch and covered her with a blanket. Then he turned to her, standing close. "You know," he said softly, "she's right." "About what?" she asked. "That I should stay," he said simply. She looked at him for a long time before whispering, "Then stay." No grand gestures, no dramatic promises, just those two words, honest and simple. He smiled, his eyes soft. "I will." They sat together in the quiet room, the hum of the night outside and the soft breathing of the little girl filling the space. It felt like home, not the kind built from money or power, but the kind built from love and belonging. Days turned into months, and their lives slowly blended. The CEO still ran his company, but his evenings were spent helping with homework, cooking dinners, and listening to laughter that once didn't exist in his house. The woman continued working, not because she needed to anymore, but because she wanted to stand on her own feet. He respected that deeply, supporting her without ever taking away her independence. As for the little girl, she never stopped calling him Daddy. The first time she said it in public, he froze again, just like that first night. But this time he smiled and said, "Yes, sweetheart." It became their new normal. Dinners together, walks in the park, movie nights on the couch. The once lonely CEO had found something more valuable than all his wealth: a family. Sometimes, when he looked back at how it all began, a quiet diner, a little girl's innocent question, and a tired mother's smile, he realized life had given him exactly what he didn't know he was missing. And when people asked how a man like him, known for being cold and distant, could change so much, he always said the same thing. Because one night, someone reminded me what love really feels like.